Hey guys, this is Doug, and I just wanted to document the motor install this time on my 2012 Ford Mustang with the Coyote motor. This motor I just received back from Tim Eichhorn at MPR Racing Engines in Florida. There it had Darton Gen 2 flanged sleeves installed in the factory block, Manley billet I-beam rods, a custom diamond piston spec'd by MPR installed. It also had the deck O-ringed for high boost application, all assembled and balanced and assembled by Tim there at MPR. Right now it's just in the long block assembly. It does have an ARP balancer on the front there, but it's pretty stripped down and bare. Over the next few days I'm going to be assembling all of the accessories and stuff on the engine. I just started putting the flywheel on before I started this video, or flex plate I should say. So I wanted to start this video before I did any of that work, and then I'll be adding to it as I assemble everything to make a complete video. So here we are at starting point. One thing that I neglected to send Tim when I sent him my motor was these variable cam timing actuators. I had removed them before I sent him the motor, so I'm reinstalling these. I had to take the valve covers off to get to it, but I'm just going to reinstall these actuators real quick and then put the valve covers back on. Okay, the actuators are installed and the valve covers have been reinstalled. So now we're going to move on to the accessories. One other thing I wanted to show you while I've got you here is when I got the engine back from MPR, they had put these nice metal covers over the intake ports, as well as the exhaust ports. Looks like they had these metal plates fabricated with their logo on it. Anyway, pretty cool. It's just to kind of go on the extra mile to make sure that nothing got inside the motor during transportation or anything. Okay, I've got the flex plate installed. This is the Circle D SFI approved flex plate. It's also got ARP hardware attaching it all, and I've also got this little snout adapter that you need to use with the torque converter that goes to my Power Glide transmission. So anyway, that's all installed, as well as this little adapter plate I think that goes in for the starter. Okay, I'm going to move on now to probably the starter, AC compressor, any other accessories I can do. I could do the water pump, but I'm attached on the hoist here to one of the holes, so I'm gonna have to figure out a different place to grab this thing. But okay, I'll post next. Okay, one thing I needed to install was this adapter bracket assembly for the oil filter. I had removed it whenever I sent the motor to Tim, so I just reassembled that, and also I'm going to go ahead and put a oil filter on it just to kind of keep it closed up. So I just grabbed this filter and filled it with oil, and I'm going to put it on there. It's a Motorcraft filter. The last time I was running a Wix filter, and I like it. And I'll probably continue with them. I just, for break-in, this will be fine. The other thing I did is I go ahead and put a date and miles on it. Accidentally put 1970, that's my birthday. I'm losing my mind. Anyway, filter's on there. I was about to install the starter when I remembered that it's a lot easier to install this Christmas tree contraption before the installer. This is basically the oil pressure sensor. This is a factory piece right here. All of these two pieces are to supply oil to the twin turbos, and then I added a oil temperature sensor in this line that goes to a gauge on my dash. Anyway, it's a lot easier to install this piece before the starter instead of after it. Okay, I've got the alternator installed, and I got the AC compressor installed. A lot of you guys know the AC belt is a pain in the ass on these. And I've got a little technique that I use. If the motor's out of the car, you can start this bottom bolt here, put the belt on, and then using a pair of so I get some light on here. Using a pair of what am I trying to say? Adjustable wrench, crescent wrench. Put a crescent wrench on this this lug right here, and you can kind of leverage back, and it will allow you to start the the top bolt here. It'll get that dowel. There's a little dowel up here at the top that you can pry and get that little dowel to slide into the block. And then once you do that, it really kind of takes the tension off, and then you can tighten up the bottom bolt, and it'll kind of square the compressor up, and then you can put the other two bolts in. But anyway, it's a little trick for putting the AC belt on. All right, I guess I'm gonna lower this thing down now and take the chain off of it so that I can install the water pump and stuff. Okay, we got the water pump and the idler, tensioner, water hose, adapters and all that stuff connected. So I think we've done about as much as we can do on the front end here. I'm not going to install the intake manifold because I want to maintain these lifting points for when I set it down in the car. But I probably will go ahead and I need to pick up some spark plugs still, so I have not installed the spark plugs or the coils yet. That's the reason I haven't done that part yet. So without spark plugs, I don't want to do any of that work yet. What I can do now is install the turbo headers, exhaust manifolds. When I took them off the car, I left everything attached. The turbos and everything are still mounted on them. So once I install the exhaust manifolds, the turbos will be sitting out here wide on the motor as well. So the only other thing that I need to do before I sit down in the car is I've got a Moroso aluminum oil pan that I want to install. However, I need to take it to the shop and have it washed out real good. It's got some residue, metallic residue in it from the rod failure from the previous motor. So the previous motor, in case I haven't mentioned it, threw a rod and shot it outside of the block. So it's pretty catastrophic. So we had a new block, all new rods, all new pistons. Really didn't salvage much of anything from the old motor with the exception of the heads. And even those required some rework by Tim to clean them up because the pistons hit the head and did a little bit of damage. So bent a couple of. I think the video cut off on my last one. My phone ran out of memory, but I think I was just saying that pretty much everything on this motor was new this go round, as far as the long block, with the exception of the heads. But anyway, I just installed the belt, serpentine belt, on all the accessories, and I'm now going to shift my attention over to installing the exhaust manifolds. Okay, that took a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I realized whenever I started putting the header on that the studs on the head, the exhaust manifold studs, were missing, and just, I guess, inadvertently got removed when they cleaned up the heads at NPR. They may be in a bag somewhere that he sent back to me, but fortunately I had another set of junk heads here in the garage that I yanked the studs off of, and got those installed, got the header installed, and as you can see, as I said earlier, I've got, when I removed it, I took the header, I left the turbo connected at the V-band on the header, I left the oil feed line connected to the turbo, I even left the vacuum line and the oil drain lines connected as well, so it kind of makes fast work of putting it back together. Whenever I drop it in the car, all that I'll have to do at that point will be just hook up the down pipes from here, and then the recirculation line from the blow-off valve, excuse me, from the wastegate to the down pipe. So it'll make it go pretty quickly. I'm now gonna move over to the right side and work on that one. See you in a minute. I just got through installing these studs that I was talking about earlier. But before I mounted the exhaust manifold on there, I wanted to show you real quickly the quality of the porting on the CNC. I'm sorry, these heads I sent to Slowco, and they CNC ported the intake and exhaust. Trying to get the light just right, but you can see kind of the pattern of the CNC cut in there. But overall, I was really happy with the quality of the port job they did. I know that you can sometimes get a little bit more from a hand port, but you also, you know, don't always know exactly what you're going to get. So I liked the CNC concept, and I felt like it was dependable and reliable, and had good data to support the improved flow numbers and stuff after it was done. So anyway, I want to show you those real quick before I bolted the headers up, and I'll show you the intake porting here in a moment. Thanks. Okay, we've now got a twin turbo motor hanging here in the air. We've got the passenger side exhaust manifold installed. Sorry this video is looking so washed out. I guess it's the lighting in my garage here, but got the exhaust manifold hooked up. Turbo, like I said, on this one, same thing. I kept the V-band connected. One thing that did is it made it so that I didn't have to guess. As you can tell, since the V-band is round, the turbo could be positioned, you know, clocked at any position there. However, for it to line up perfectly with the down pipe and the discharge piping, there's a sweet spot, you know, that it needs to be in. Since I disconnected this without disconnecting the V-band clamps, I kept them tight. What that did is that maintained the position of the turbo relative to the header. So that should make it go together smoothly once I go to hook up the discharge piping and the downpipe and stuff. So probably gonna call it a night. Like I said, I've still got to do the Moroso aluminum oil pan, which is not hooked up yet. Right now, I've still got a stock pan. It's actually a good pan that I had the drain fittings welded into and stuff, but I elected to go with a Moroso pan that has a little bit more volume to it. So I've got to clean that thing out really well before I install it. So this is probably it for tonight. I'll probably need to, I guess the last thing I can do after the oil pan will be hook the wiring harness back up. I had it tie wrapped to the valve covers here, but whenever it got sent to the shop, they disconnected everything so they could clean all the parts and stuff. So I can reconnect the wiring harness. I probably will tonight go ahead and hook up the oil feed lines to the turbos. That goes to that little Christmas tree thing I was telling you about before that's down under here. That's where those oil lines will connect, the two 1/4 inch lines. And then that's pretty much it for tonight, I guess. I wish I could go ahead and hook up the intake manifold and stuff like that, but I've just found that lifting it is a little easier with these 2 points here. And I'll just install the intake manifold after I set the motor in the car. So that's about it for tonight. I could probably set this thing in the car tomorrow and get this hoist and clean my garage out a little bit. So see you tomorrow. I went ahead and hooked up the 2 oil lines I was talking about, and I couldn't resist the urge to throw some engine dress up on it and just give you a little sneak peek into how it's going to look when it's completed. I had these coil covers made for the car that are reminiscent of the Porsche Turbo font, but a little play on words since my car is known as Turbo and I have plates that say that. So I had these coil covers made up that say the same. So it should look pretty cool once I get it all in the car. It's kind of hard to tell. They look kind of white in the video here, but they're actually brushed aluminum. Anyway, I thought that looked pretty cool. And then it'll all be going together. This is the Holly race intake that I'm going to put on it. Right now it's got some vinyl that matches the same as the blue on the car, but it probably is not going to hold up to any heat, so it'll probably just be solid black by the time it's all done. So anyway, like I said, I couldn't resist throwing a little engine dress up on it just to get a glimpse at what it's going to look like eventually. See you tomorrow. Okay, this morning I went and got the Moroso pan cleaned out. This is the stock pan that I took off. So now I am installing the oil pickup. I had also neglected to send this to Tim, so I'm installing the oil pickup, the windage tray, and then I'll be installing the Moroso pan on top of all this. And I also need to check the clearance between the oil pickup here and the pan. Okay, I've got the oil pan installed now. As I mentioned before, it's a Moroso +2 quart aluminum pan. This took a little bit longer than I wanted to, just because I spent a lot of time making sure that the distance between the oil pickup and the bottom of the pan was correct. Tim had given me a spec to keep this between 0.25 and 0.28 of an inch. So I was using some Play-Doh and measuring the distance of the pickup. Normally this wouldn't be such a big deal, but on the aftermarket pan, the little standoff that the stock standoff for the oil pump pickup, if you leave it the same length, it puts the pickup right down smack on the bottom of the pan, which would cause problems for oil starvation. So it requires shimming. Actually, I cut down the little standoff. I think I've got the stock one laying over here. I can show you. Yeah, this little piece here is what I'm talking about. So if you run this aftermarket pan and you run this standoff, it will put the oil pickup way down too low. So I ended up having to cut it down, and then double checking my measurement before I button it all up. So anyway, that's done. That's really the last piece of hardware on the motor that needed to be installed. Really, now I'll lower it back down a little bit and probably go ahead and hook up the wiring harness. And after that, I'm probably going to start looking at setting it in the car. So, thanks. One more thing I wanted to mention is that the pan that I bought, it has a bung right here in the front that I put one of the 10AN fittings in. And in the second one, I drilled over here and used a bulkhead fitting. Ideally, you would probably have this welded so that you don't have to worry about it ever coming loose or anything, but I just double checked it, make sure it's tight, and whenever I hook it up, I'll be sure and put a backup on the fitting itself so that it doesn't turn. And really, once it's installed, you shouldn't have to mess with it too much. So anyway, just wanted to show you those two as I was walking over here to get the wiring harness. I noticed it and thought I'd point it out for you. So anyway, starting to look like a motor. Okay, I've got the wiring harness installed. It all just pushes back into these little clip spots. Right there, it's right here. These little clips that it pushes into along the top of the valve cover. Anyway, I had my wiring harness. It's a little congested looking, but I have it all tie wrapped up because I also have my MSD two-step wired into it. So I had it all laid in here and tie wrapped together. So when I took it off the car, it's all together still. So anyway, the good news is when you lay it back up here and start plugging things in, plugs start lining up with sensors, and everything just plugs back in the same way that it was. The only one that I'm a little bit unsure of, and I'm going to go double check my wiring diagram, is on the knock sensors, the two wires here. I remember last time I worked on these, I couldn't remember which is right and which is left, which does make a difference, because if the motor's hearing knocking on one side, it may do things, I guess, on that side. But if they're crisscrossed, it could, be getting a reading that's incorrect, for which bank. So I'm gonna go double check my wiring on that. But after that, like I said, I'm gonna probably start looking at getting it set up to start getting ready to plug, drop in the car. So here's where I haven't installed the coils yet. I went ahead and ordered some spark plugs today. I run the NGK Iridium plugs, and they're I think it's 6510, I think is the number. Anyway, O'Reilly's wants like $10 a piece for them, but if I order them from Rock Auto, they're about $6. So I went ahead and ordered them. They'll be here in a couple days. So once they get in, I'll gap them, drop them in the hole, and hook the coils up, and then plug everything in, and that'll be complete. But I can do that even after the motor's in the car, so not a big deal. All right, that's it for now. Well, here's a little update to let you know where I'm at. I decided to just go for it and start dropping this thing into the car. I do have a lift that I use. Since the twin turbos are connected to the motor, you have to go in through the top. So I kind of have a process that I've developed over doing this a few times, where I lift the car up off the ground just a little bit, take the tire off the right side, and that allows me to slide my hoist over into position. I disconnect the hydraulic rods on the hood so that I can lift it a little bit wider with 2x4, and then that allows me to slide the motor over into position. Once it's into position, then I can hook up all of the, so I can get a light here, hook up all of the ground, this bracket that attaches to the AC, and I'm kind of making my way right now, going around the motor, hooking up as much of the electrical stuff as I can, and then once I get everything positioned and as much hooked up as possible, again, trying to hook up stuff that's maybe more difficult to get to from other positions, I can hook it all up while it's elevated here, and then set everything into the engine compartment. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I didn't want to post my next step as it just sitting in the car, so I wanted you to kind of see what it takes, or what it took to get it to that point. But so here we are. I'm going through now, hooking up as much harness and AC lines, wiring harnesses, just as much stuff as I can before I set it down into the engine compartment. Okay, got it set down in here pretty good. Let me find my light here. I actually created a little bit of extra work for myself because the Hellion twin turbo kit tells you before you set the motor all the way down, you should drop in these pieces of the downpipe here and on the driver's side over here. If you set the motor all the way down, then you have a really hard time putting those in. So of course I didn't remember that until after I had already set the motor all the way down and started the motor mounts. So I had to undo those, raise it back up, drop the downpipes back in, and now I'm setting it back in. So I've got to come in here, and that's where the motor mounts drop down on the BMR K-member. Makes it a lot easier than stock, in my opinion. But you drop that bolt through, and then once you get it to drop through on both sides, you can start a nut on it and then put your back up on the top and use an impact or a air ratchet to tighten it from the bottom. So it makes it a little bit easier. Anyway, that's where I'm at for now, and I'll post an update in a little bit. Okay, here's where I left off for tonight. Went ahead and got the motor set all the way down into the motor mounts. Got the motor mounts tightened down. Went ahead and released my hoist and got it out of the way. Put the wheels back on. Haven't set it on the ground yet, but get a light here. Basically have it all set down in here now. Like I said, I got the downpipes positioned to where they'll be easy to work with once I continue. Motor mounts are attached. All the wiring is wiring harnesses are hooked up. Obviously I haven't hooked up the fuse block or connected any of the harnesses. In fact, I still need to install the computer and stuff goes down here off of the frame rail. I'm gonna install that and start connecting the coolant lines and the turbo discharge lines on both sides. Those will be the next steps. And of course I can go ahead and remove my chain and these block off plates, and start installing the intake manifold, fuel rails, fuel lines, all that stuff can be installed next. So anyway, just wanted to show you where I stopped off for tonight, and then still a bit of work to be done, but most of it's all kind of on the top end here, so it should be pretty easy to access and get it done. Okay, the spark plugs showed up today, so I went ahead and gapped them, dropped them into the holes, put the coils on, bolted that down, and then plugged those into my MSD wiring harness for the two-step. I've got both sides done now, and I realized I needed to video an update before I went any further. I also wanted to take this chance to show you some of this port work, the CNC port work that Slowco did on the intake. I think I showed y'all some pictures on the exhaust side. So this is the intake side. Hopefully you can see it here. But one of the things I liked about them is they published flow numbers before and after, so you kind of get an idea of what you're going to get. So one more looking down in there. Hang on. So anyway, they did really nice work. I liked it. Okay, so I'm going to get set up now to do the intake manifold. Got those covers taken off. I'm going to set the intake manifold on, bolt it down, and then I'll probably do the fuel lines that are back here on the back, hook them up to the fuel rails, and then I'll post another update. Okay, I've got the Holley EFI race intake installed now. Install is pretty straightforward. I used all of their hardware. The only thing you had to do is on mine, I had on my injector dynamics fuel injectors, I had these long hats on them that I had to remove to make it so that the injector's tight fit here. You can't really see, I don't think. Maybe right there, perhaps. Yeah. The injector is like as short as possible right now, and that's what's required. Basically, just the bare injector plus the small adapter on the bottom, because the rail sits really close to the manifold. It sits right down on top of it. So I elected to keep my I've got Division X fuel rails and fuel system. I elected to keep those just because I thought they were maybe a little bit better quality than the ones that came in the Holley kit. But anyway, so the intake manifold is installed. The fuel rails are bolted down. The injectors are in. The injectors are plugged in. The fuel lines are attached to the back of the rails. You can see there. And then I did a little bit of tie wraps to kind of tidy some things up. Started kind of cleaning up these. I've got the wiring harness that comes off the MSD is plugged in over here to the MSD module. It's underneath that vacuum block. This vacuum block right here will end up getting moved over here onto the firewall once I'm complete. Had to move some of the vacuum lines and stuff around. The Holley intake has the vacuum ports on the bottom of it, so you kind of have to think about it before you get in there, because it's kind of a bitch to get up underneath. They're way back over here. May be able to see them actually right there. They come off the bottom of the manifold. So what that means is that it's difficult to attach the vacuum lines after you install the manifold. So I went ahead and capped off 3 of them, and I've got one big one that's coming out that's going to come over here and feed a vacuum manifold that I have. It also feeds the brake booster, so I may rethink that a little bit depending on how it comes along, but overall that's where I'm at for tonight. I'm going to stop. The back kind of hurts from leaning over, and I went ahead and set the coil covers on there so you kind of get a feel for what those are going to look like. You won't see them as much because the downpipe runs right there next to it, so that'll kind of cover them up a little bit once once it gets done. But anyway, I think it came out pretty good. That blue is the same blue that I've got on the vinyl wrap on the car right now. I'm not sure if it'll stand up to the heat or not, but for now we'll leave it on there and see how it holds up. Alright, so tomorrow I'll tidy up some stuff back here on the back firewall, and then I'll probably move to installing the wastegates and the little spool pieces here on the downpipes, hook up the vacuum and boost lines on the wastegates, and then probably start looking at installing the computer sits right over here to the left, and then I can start plugging in all that stuff and get it ready to install the fan. I still got to hook up like the coolant lines over here, tighten up the air discharge lines off the turbos on both sides. So quite a bit of little tidy up work here on the front. So anyway, that's where I'm at for tonight. I'll post more tomorrow. Okay, I'm getting set up to install the transmission today. I typically like to set the motor in place from the top because I can put the headers and stuff on the motor and then set it down in there. The transmission's a little easier to do from the bottom, and I use a hydraulic cart that I put underneath the car, and then I jack it up to the correct elevation, and then that helps me line it up. I'm basically a one-man operation, so this helps me do it by myself. I'll post a few more videos here in a second. So this is the cart and the Power Glide transmission that I'll be installing. It's got a Pro Torque 2-piece billet front converter on it. It also requires this little adapter right here that allows it to slide right into the cavity on the rear main, on the crank, and kind of closes up the gap there. All of this stuff I can mount up after I get the transmission installed because it's an open bottom on the transmission. So anyway, just wanted to show you the cart I've got. I got a Harbor Freight. Here we go. We're fixing to start lifting it up, getting it lined up, and then I'm going to try to stab a couple of the bolts through and get it started, pull it up onto the engine block. Okay, so I've been kind of slowly lowering I raise the car all the way up as high as it'll go, and then I start lowering the car down onto the transmission, just kind of lowering it a little bit, lining it up, lowering it a little bit, lining it up, and eventually it'll get to the point where we can get in here and pull it onto the bell housing bolts. But anyway, it's a little bit of just, lower it, check it, lower it, check it, until I get it lined up where it needs to be. Okay, I've got a couple of bolts in the bell housing, and I've got a couple of bolts in the transmission cross member to hold it up. Still have a bit to do to button it up as far as like the rest of the bell housing bolts, shifter cable, converter, some wiring stuff. So anyway, just want to give you a little update. It's in its home, so that's a good start. Post more in a little bit. Okay, I've got all the bell housing bolts are bolted up now. These on passenger and driver's side over here. Over here on this side, there you go. And then the two that are on the top are installed. And now I'm going to turn my attention towards installing the starter. Goes right here in this space right there. It's a kind of a tight fit too, though. So, we get that installed, and then once that is installed, then I can get the transmission lines and probably the torque converter next. Okay, the starter is installed, and we got it all buttoned up, and the wiring harness hooked up. So that's where we're going to stop for today. So tomorrow I'll be hooking up the converter to the flex plate. I've got to hook up the hydraulic transmission fluid lines for the transmission. They go back to a cooler at the back of the car. And then we can turn our attention to probably drive shaft, exhaust, and some of the small wiring items. So there we go. Okay, so I've got the transmission lines, fluid lines hooked up. Those run back to a cooler that I've got back here in the back. Kind of dark, but fluid lines are in. The drive shaft is in. I've tidied up some of the wiring and some of the harness stuff up here in the front, just to make sure it stays off the heat. And I'm getting ready to install the X-pipe and the mufflers. I'm doing those next, and after that there will just be a little bit of tidy up on the top end, putting fluids in it and getting ready to fire up. I'll post more in a second. Okay, I've got the X-pipe installed. This is one that I had some QTP low profile cutouts cut into it. They're electric cutouts. That allows me to run a street setup, although this setup that's on there right now is just some turn down. So my exhaust system has evolved over the years, but this is probably the quietest setup that I have right now, which is through the full exhaust, no over the axle tubes, and just turn downs right before the axle. I'm pretty much done on the bottom end here. Everything else is on the top. I got just a few little things to connect, and then we'll start putting fluids in it. She's alive! Let her get up to temperature and let all these fluids burn off. I'm sure it's going to smoke a little bit. Being the first fire up, we made quite a mess with the previous deal with the oil being sprayed underneath the car and stuff, so we'll let it all burn off. We got oil pressure. Coolant temperatures coming up. We got decent vacuum. All good signs. have an air pocket or something in there. Just kind of watching the temperatures. I don't see any major leaks underneath the car. I did have one in the oil pan drain plug, but I fixed that before we fired it up. So we'll let it keep warming up. I'm probably gonna go ahead and back it out of the garage. Try to pull some heavy vacuum on it to get the rings to see based on NPR's ranking recommendation. I'm going to cruise down here and get some gas. Sunday afternoon, 66 degrees. Perfect day to break in a new motor. I got my partner in crime with me back here. We don't have AC in the car yet, so he's we got the windows down. But so far everything's looking good. We've put 14 miles on it on the way to the gas station. Put some fresh E85 in it. Coolant temperatures are staying nice and cool. Transmission staying nice and cool. Everything's looking great. So